Welcome on to a Sunday night edition of Dunc'd on YouTube. Thanks to those of y'all who are listening. Please give us a like and subscribe there if that is your preferred medium. We have a big show today. Later on, we will be discussing Jeremiah Fears out of Oklahoma. Dunc'd On Prime subscribers, of course, have already gotten that part of the show as an early release. But first, Danny, let's begin by discussing the Oklahoma City Thunder doing what was needed to be done, what is expected to be done by a home team down 1-0.
That's right. Historically, home teams that lose game one have a big bounce back in game two, and that was absolutely the case here. 123, 107 in favor of the Thunder. And that 123 is really important. And I think that's where I want to kind of start our focus in this. And the really bad news for the Indiana Pacers is that the Oklahoma City Thunder scoring 123 points on under 100 possessions, 96 is the possession count that I saw. It wasn't through the unsustainable success in the ways that like we often talk about, where okay, the Thunder didn't shoot the lights out from three. They weren't destroying the Pacers in transition, either in frequency or efficiency in transition. They weren't really fully, at least, demolishing the Pacers on the offensive glass. They had a better offensive rebound rate, but actually had fewer second chance points. So the fallbacks, regret things that could easily regress to the mean, traditional ones, those weren't what hurt the Pacers. Instead, it was pretty much everything else. It was they were giving up a lot of twos. They gave up a fair amount of free throws, but I mean both teams shot a lot of free throws, especially in the second half. And that to me is why the Pacers should be very concerned, is that they couldn't stop the Thunder doing the kind of the basic stuff that defenses are supposed to stop.
Yeah, I think it was a big problem. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was a big part of that. The Thunder were nice enough to try to go a little bit more egalitarian right at the beginning of the game and get some other guys going. Their first play was Case and Wallace trying to attack against Tyrese Haliburton off the dribble for a layup, which looked pretty good. But generally, things bogged down, and then they went to Shai Gilgeous-Alexander at the end of that first quarter and continued that throughout the game, basically whenever he was in. Although the key stretch was actually outscoring them 16-7 when Shea was off the floor, at which is a point at which I thought actually OKC would be able to be effective in this series, and they were with some adjustments, which we will discuss momentarily here. So I would say the one thing that, and I'm not really pushing back on because it was an intro for a reason. But the one thing I would say I would expect will change at least from this game was that other than pockets of effort from the Indiana Pacers, OKC just played harder than them. Like one of the plays that really stood out to me was Chet Holmgren just falling on the ground on a loose ball. Nobody like dove on top of him to force a jump ball, and instead he just threw a pass to the weak side for a three. There are a lot of those plays where there'd be long rebounds that would bounce, and you'd be like, "Oh, like is no one going to get that?" Or the Pacers get? Nope, they don't get it. So there would be moments where someone like Pascal Siakam or Nemhard would come out of a timeout and boost the effort level for a few possessions, but largely OKC as the more desperate team and also just generally one of the hardest playing teams that I've ever seen, quite frankly, had the advantage just in getting to loose balls, out sprinting the Pacers in general. So that's the one thing that, especially as you move to Indiana, and OKC has of course been far less dominant on the road in these playoffs, that I would expect to equalize. Everything else, though, which I think you can get into now, just these factors where, yes, there was a reason that OKC was favored in this series, and we saw many of those at work tonight.
And I think we really should start that with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. He was huge, 34 points, 11 to 21 from the field, did almost all of that inside the arc. Shai was 10 of 17 on twos, 1 of 4 on threes, and then got to the line 12 times, made 11 of those 12. Not all of those were shooting fouls. There were some non-shooting fouls that became free throws for Shai and both teams at different moments in time. Also, 8 assists and only 2 turnovers for Gilgeous-Alexander, the turnover margin was actually pretty even. I want to talk about that later. And so part of what makes Shai so devastating is that he can get to his spots, and when he gets to his spots and isn't really feeling the contest, he makes a ridiculous proportion of shots that other
Yeah.
guys don't. So, like, there was this one where he worked to about the free throw line and took a jumper over Ben Shepherd, and we're like, oh yeah, he's absolutely going to make this shot. And the Thunder have some of these advantages because the Pacers, A, don't have that many guys that can even plausibly guard Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and B, like, so in the first place, and they can't play those guys all the time, and you can do all these different things. It's what basketball is to get other players on Shai. But one of my favorite plays of this entire game was one, and you talked about it great on the live show, is Aaron Nesmith was guarding Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and Shai just burned him for a bucket. Just got a mid ranger, pretty good contest from Nesmith, and just drilled it in his face.
Yeah, and like Shai every once in a while, when he gets a certain matchup, he would even do this against Anthony Edwards in the conference finals. Once or twice a game, he'll be like, "Yeah, you know what? I'm going to just go one-on-one against this guy that I think is their best defender. I just want to challenge myself and see how it's going to go." That time he was able to beat Nesmith, and Nembhard he's gone against one-on-one playing also. And I think he's got a decent advantage to get shots against him. But then once you get other guys involved as well, that's when it becomes difficult. And Tyrese Haliburton, he I thought was not as good as in game one with his hedging, and even towards in the fourth quarter of game one, he kind of slowed down. So obviously, Halliburton's performance will be another thing we'll talk about. But Halliburton, defensively, they brought him back in with less rest and had him play the first 8 minutes of the fourth, and he was basically exhausted by the end of that stretch, and just was like uh, not in position at all. And then on any kind of screening action, OKC is so good at changing the angles of the screen. Shai, as I've said, is I think he has the best handle in the league. And it's not necessarily like the showiest handle, although he can put guys on the ground. It's more that it's just effectively he gets to where he wants to go. He's not going to lose the ball. He never turns it over. And he can set screens up incredibly well. And so often you would see the Pacers with like someone coming up the screen try to send him into the screen, and he would still just be able to reject it anyway. Or the OKC screeners would be able to flip the angle of the screen. And Hartenstein is amazing at that. You know, if someone like Siakam or Toppin came up, he split that so many times. And I'm so impressed by I always thought he had the raw tools to be great at it, but it's easy to forget now that he basically didn't play conventional pick and roll basketball with the center at all in his career until this year. When they brought in Hartenstein, they've had Chet do a lot more rolling to the rim now too, and be involved in the screening action a lot more. Last year, he was kind of used as a spot up guy, and they would have guard screen much more for him. And the league, I don't know, like they still have that in their arsenal, but it kind of seemed clear in the playoffs that teams were able to deal with that by just packing the back line and not letting OKC get all the way to the rim. So, like, all right, now we're going to call up your center. And if your center is in a drop coverage, Jay's going to get to a 55% shot at the elbow that you're not going to be able to deal with. Hartenstein was great setting screens too. They tried to double him, and then Hartenstein immediately set up Chet for a dunk. So the Pacers have real problems schematically. Even though OKC didn't score well at the very end of the last game, like they were still getting pretty good shots. And I think the Pacers are coming to the same conclusion, though they don't, to me, have the same level of personnel as the Minnesota Timberwolves, but they're coming to the same conclusion and Denver had it at the beginning of the series, that Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is the MVP for a reason. You can't just like play your normal defense. We'll shade over a little bit. No, that shit's not going to work. Like, you need to get the ball out of his hands. You need to play zone. You need to vary up your defense a ton. You need to vary up the defenders that are on him. Just like stick Andrew Nembhard on him, and like, yeah, we'll try to help more. And then, maybe we'll do some peel switching if we get beat. That's especially now that they've seen that for a game, that's not going to work.
And it's going to be fascinating to see what Rick Carlisle has at game 3. There is travel, not a super long distance, but there is travel. Game 3 isn't until Wednesday. But the problem that the Pacers have is that they just don't have that many other wrinkles. As I'm seeing it, would love to be wrong to see them really throw some new stuff out there, especially considering some of the limitations in their personnel. Like, it's not like they have guys that could come off the bench. We'll see if Jarris Walker ends up becoming available. All we knew is that he's unavailable for games 1 and 2. Now, that does not mean he's available and great for game 3. We just don't know. But if Thomas Bryant is in the rotation, if that's Tony Bradley, it's not much better. McConnell at times can be attacked, and I think there are times they could go to Ben McBathron more, but he does have these flaws in terms of consistency of execution. Like they could go to some zone, they could try some of this stuff, but Shai is a monster, and there are going to be challenges there. And I mean, there are a number of different ways to describe the health of the Thunder offense. 25 assists on 40 made baskets. They had basically a 120 half court offensive rating. And that's really where to me the crux of the issue is. And again, it wasn't ridiculous 3-point shooting or anything like that. Both teams were very inefficient in transition. We talked about the Thunder having trouble off steals in game 1. That continued in game 2, but then it wasn't like either team was dominating in second chance points or anything like that. And so it's such an interesting question. And then I was bringing up the ideas of the health of the Thunder, and this isn't meant to be an indictment of these two players because they're way better than most of this fourth and fifth best players on an offense. But Lou Dort only attempted 3 shots from the field in 26 minutes. Cason Wallace only attempted 4, and he got one of them was like a wide open kind of like free throw line area jumper that he made, and I think the other one was off of a cut. And that was another thing that looked a lot more alive for the Thunder, especially in some of their good moments offensively in the second half, was okay, you're going to bring extra pressure at Shai. We can exploit that. Yeah, sure, we can, 4-on-3 and all that type of stuff, but also the eyeballs that are going that direction, we can get guys around the basket, and they were finding guys for layups and dunks more to my eye than they were in game 1.
Well, and that's borne out by the stats. So they had 7 assists, 4 buckets at the rim, which is not a crazy high number, but they had 13 assisted threes. 13 of their 14 made threes were assisted. Shai had the only one that wasn't. Oh, no, actually, I think that's incorrect. I think it was Wiggins, actually, because Shai's actually had a corner 3 for his one make. So and they had 25 assists on 40 field goals after only 13 assists and 208 passes in game 1, which is a season low for any team.
Wow.
And so they tried to get more guys involved early. Still, it ended up mostly being Shai. But then I thought they did a much better job moving the ball in the non-Shai minutes, using Hartenstein more as well. And then just their cutting was really good. Caruso was devastating as a cutter, and they did a pretty good job of finding him. And so overall, like Shai was getting the spots. He never looked uncomfortable other than maybe like a 3. There was a 3 possession stint where Nembhard really kind of got into him, got a couple of deflections on him. But other than that, he looked awesome with his 34 points on 11 to 21 and got to the foul line plenty too, and had 8 assists. So he really was having his cake and eating it too. And to me, the way to stop the Thunder is making their bad shooters beat you from 3. Wallace and Dort can hit, but they're maybe less reliable. Caruso was awesome. He was 4 of 8 from 3, had 20 points. And then Aaron Wiggins was another guy who we'll talk about momentarily. But I think the next place we need to go is just the Pacer offense. And there have been, I wouldn't consider the fourth quarter particularly competitive. I can explain why in a second. But first 2 quarters, and then the first 3 quarters of this one. Yeah, I realized the Pacers had 33 in the third quarter, but that was like Nesmith getting loose for some threes, bunch of bad Thunder fouls. I didn't think their offense looked awesome really until Haliburton in the fourth, when it was kind of out of reach already, really scored 9 straight points. So first 3 quarters in this one, 4 of 9 at the rim, 4 of 9 upper paint for the Pacers, 5 of 12 from mid-range. And then in the fourth quarter, they actually were 7 of 8 from the upper paint and made a respectable showing of it. So Indiana, like their jump shooting wasn't great, but they just got forced into a lot of above the break threes. And unless it's Miles Turner or Tyrese Haliburton, that's not just like awesome shots. Like you want them to be in the corner. And they did end up getting a fair number of corner threes in the end, but that was not a huge number in the first 3 quarters. First 3 quarters, they had 12. They made 5 out of 12 corner threes in the first 3 quarters. So that's a good number, but it's not enough to break the Thunder's back as their corner three-point shooting did in game 1, unless they're getting more, and they weren't able to do that even though they weren't turning the ball over.
Well, and not meant to discount what he did in the fourth quarter, but here are Tyrese Haliburton's stats after 3.
Yeah.
5 points, 2 of 7 from the field, 1 of 5 from 3, 0 free throw attempts, 4 assists, and 3 turnovers. And so you look at that combined 7 field goal attempts and 4 assists. That is a relatively small involvement in the offense for the team's best offensive player, for one of the most important offensive players in the NBA, especially in these playoffs. And yeah, there was that stretch where Neesmith got loose in the third, but overall, it's not that the Thunder were getting the ball out of Halliburton's hands and giving up a bunch of other things as a consequence. And so
Yeah, they're
Halliburton,
not, like, really putting 2 on the ball
no,
in that extreme of a way. They're doing a lot of switching, or, Hartenstein when it's him, or Chet, they are stopping penetration, but then they're just going to, like, once the guy gets back in contact, then they'll return to their man, even if it is Turner at the arc. Like, they're willing to give that up, or they're willing to make a rotation if needed on the backside, but they're not doing anything crazy on Halbert, in contrast to what I predicted at the
yeah.
start of the series.
And then
But they still have managed, like, they're still not letting him get openings on the pick and roll. Like, they are actually, and they're not letting him get deep off the pick and roll either. They're like, yeah, if you want to throw a pass to a shooter above the break because we're loaded up on you, like, we will let you have that pass, and then we'll try to close that down, but the guy's going to get the shot off. That's what we're willing to give up. And in this one, at least, first half, Indiana's 3 of 14 on above the break threes.
yeah, and who's going to take those shots? How good are they going to be? Are really important questions. And remember that one of the huge swing factors in game 1 was Obi Toppin hitting a bunch of above the break threes, and he was 1 for 5 this time around, 1 for 8 from the field, which means he missed all of his twos.
Mhm.
And so there are going to be those sorts of games. Turner was 1 for 5. He can sometimes make those, but the turnover barrage that he had in game 1, I mean, just like all the other Pacers, that toned away. And so for the Pacers, I mean, the good news is the salient, like this, the signal from game 1, or the adjustment is probably a better way to put it, is that the insanely high turnovers that they had in the first half, that isn't really the case.
Yeah.
Overall, in game 2, turned it over on 15.5% of their possessions. That's still a lot, but compared to the Thunder full season, regular season was like 17, playoffs before this series was 18% of forcing opponent turnovers. It's significantly more manageable than that. And considering the Pacers are generally a low turnover team, that is more what we expected. And yet again, the Oklahoma City Thunder weren't really effective in their points off of turnovers. They were a little bit over a point per possession, 17 points on, or sorry, they had 14 points on 15 Pacers turnovers, so below a point per possession. I flipped it in when I was reading the box score. So you have that kind of working, but the Pacers, well, both teams have done a great job of getting back. And so the possession game got better. Neither team was particularly great on the offensive glass in terms of percentage or converting those into second chance points. There was one where the Pacers eventually got, I can't remember if it was a 2 or 3, but it took like 3 offensive rebounds for them to get there. And when you think about, when Halliburton is having a more quiet game, and he eventually got to 17 points, did a lot of that in the fourth, as it was, we would have said it was out of hand if it were any other team but the Pacers, but they never quite got back into it. It wasn't a trade-off. And you talked about having your cake and eating it too. It's like Siakam was 3 of 11 from the field. And I thought that generally his looks were somewhat tough. The free throws were a little bit different. Neesmith, 5 of 12. He had that 3-point run, but then he couldn't get anything going inside the arc like everybody else. And Nemhard had a couple of moments, but was 1 of 4 on threes, 3 of 4 on twos, him doing that kind of stuff that generally isn't going to kill you. And so there wasn't that really combustible element with the Pacers overall. And I mean, they did get to a respectable, like if you want to call it, like their half court offensive rating was fine, but neither team could score in transition, everything else. And so I I think that the Pacers, like, this got closer to an equilibrium, though I think they can make more shots. But I brought up the ways that the Thunder offense being this good was concerning. But for the Pacers, you would kind of love to have an offensive game like this in a loss where you like couldn't make a three or anything else. But this was more to me, the Pacers, their shot chart, especially in the first three quarters, looked more like what the Thunder are going to live with. And maybe the percentages were a little bit worse. They were performed below expectation on jumpers, but it was within the realm. And if that's within the realm and the Thunder performance is on the really high end, but within the realm, like that's the the equilibrium in the series is in the Thunder favor, but that's what we expected.
Yeah, so I guess the question really is what why is Indiana not able to get into the paint? I mean, part of it is just the Thunder personnel. And Indiana is just not really beating their man, right? Right? They're not the Thunder are not giving up bad switches. If they do, they're fronting in the post. They have good ball pressure, so the Pacers aren't able to throw these great passes to guys wide open under the basket. That they got a couple of those in the third quarter during the competitive portion, but not a ton. Siakam just hasn't had the matchup that he's been able to go to, and even
Right.
if in the Knicks series, he was going up against Anunoby. Well, you didn't have all these sharks around like Siakam. He kind of needs to like work to a spot. I mean, he's gotten so much better from his Toronto days, but if he's going into an isolation game, he's going to work to a spot. He wants to spin back. It's pretty deliberate, and like guys can surprise him from behind and take it away, or bother him, or make him pick up his dribble and then retreat back to their man. And Jalen Williams, like Siakam, did get one really nice move against him, but other than that, he hasn't had any success going at him. And then Alex Caruso comes in, and Caruso is obviously going to be someone who can cause problems for Siakam if he doesn't get a little over aggressive and foul. And even someone like Cason Wallace is really hard to move for Siakam, but it really is more about the Thunder than having a bunch of rim protection and being able to fly around behind the play. Even someone like Shea makes a lot, like Shea made a lot of plays defensively in
Yeah.
this game tonight.
Yeah, he had a
And
beautiful strip on Haliburton from behind that led to basically a pick six.
yeah, he had 4 steals and a block in this
Yeah.
one. And I mean, that was like, again, he's not great one on one. And there's a few times where he just got beat on screens. And I thought they actually did a much better job of involving him in game one than they did in game two. And particularly like when Shea's guarding Siakam, Shea actually stopped Siakam a couple of times. Like he pulled the chair on him once and he stripped him another time. So that's I thought that's where Shea might be meat there, but he's kind of worse if he's involved in screening action, trying to get through a screen. If you actually, and he doesn't really want to like get into guys' bodies on the perimeter and contest, he doesn't want to foul. But if you actually like go at him in the post, he'll pull the chair. He's got good hands. Like he's not just meat down there. And he also can, or he can turn the guy into the help and maybe get a steal that way. So yeah, Siakam. And then the biggest thing too, with both Halliburton and Siakam, TJ McConnell, part of this too, is the Pacers transition game has largely been shut down.
Mhm.
Like, do you really just they had one play where Matherin got a quick bucket after a make after Chet got it, an awesome alley oop, but and there are a few times where the Thunder lapsed and Mark Daigneault called timeout after one of them. But I mean, those fast break point numbers are not anything that the Thunder are going to be kept up at night. They are just so good at getting back on defense and matching up. And then also because they have so many good defenders, it's not the end of the world if it's like the Knicks, like, oh, Carl Anthony Towns is on Halliburton, like we're screwed here now, right? Like, or like Darius Garland is in the wrong matchup on Siakam in the post, and he's going to immediately follow him. Like, you don't have any of those kind of situations. That's
Mhm.
part of what makes the Thunder transition defense so good is they could just match up with who they're going to match up with and not get caught.
The Pacers were only credited with 9 fast break points, though it's important to note that's 5 more than the Thunder's 4 fast break points. The Thunder were 1 of 6 on what the NBA called fast break opportunities. Even if you go to a looser definition, the Pacers weren't successfully running off makes that often, and so they weren't able to do it. And I think that can we can go from there to a an important tactical wrinkle that we saw in game 2 that you especially called for after game 1, which is the double big. And going to Chet Holmgren and Isaiah Hartenstein together, especially focusing that on the non-Halliburton minutes because those lineups can't really exploit going that big. And it's not like the
And even
Pacers.
more than the I guess I did say non Halliburton. Also, with Thomas Bryant out there too is
Sure,
another way that
especially
they
that. Yeah,
attack.
yeah.
Yeah.
You can kind of those two boxes, and I thought the double big worked very well overall. They were taking and for me the main sales pitch of that is defensive, but Hartenstein also sets good enough screens that there are ways you can make it work for you offensively too.
Yeah. And so Hartenstein on, Haliburton off, 16-8 that they outscored him. The overall double big look didn't actually play that much. It was only 11-7 in those minutes. But I think also just playing Hartenstein more really helped. And it did look pretty good at the end of the first when they initially took the lead. I thought that was a key stretch. And then, it really was 10 after the start of the second quarter when they ran more through Hartenstein. J Dub had some nice moments during that period. But more importantly, the Pacers just couldn't score. They had 41 points in the first half, and they had 27, probably midway through the second quarter, excuse me. So that was, and I'm not sure, the Pacers shooting, like, yes, it could have been a little bit better, right? If you look at our luck adjusted stats for the game, this is just not based on the camera tracking contest data because we don't have access to that at this point right after the game, but just based on when in the shot clock these shots happened, who took them, and where they're from. Yeah, Pacers left about 7 points on the table, 1 through free throws, 6 through jumpers. Pretty much all of those were above the break. They made 2 fewer above the breaks than expected, and again, that was, uh, with the playing better late in the game after it was already decided. And then, as mentioned, they only had 8 field goals in the paint through the first 3 quarters. That's the big reason. And then when you look at the offense for the Thunder, like, they basically did what was expected. They hit one more 3 than was expected above the break and shot well on free throws, a little bit better than expected. They gained 2 points there, but the expected score of the game was 121 to 114, ended up being 123-107. But again, that doesn't account for the fact that the Pacers just got all this stuff at the basket in the fourth quarter, which is not something that I necessarily think they found an answer on.
While we're talking about rotations, there was also a bizarre stretch in the more competitive portion of the game where Rick Carlisle played Obi Toppin as the lone big. That did not go well. It was 7-2, I think, in a relatively quick short period of time. And I don't really know. I've generally thought that Carlisle has had too quick of a hook on Miles Turner, who only played 27 minutes in this game. And when you consider that it was, there was garbage time at the end, but there wasn't, 10 minutes of garbage time. And yet again, the defense is significantly better when Miles Turner is on the floor. He had the strongest plus minus, still negative, but the strongest plus minus of the Pacers starting five. They were outscored by only 4 in his 27 minutes. And there are times that the Pacers can cobble together credible rim protection when Miles Turner's off the floor, but to me, it's still the exception rather than the rule. And we again saw the Thunder be more zealous in their attacks of the basket when Turner was off the floor, and that's exactly what a team should do against the Pacers.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. So I think the next place to go is Aaron Wiggins was fantastic. Another guy actually that we called to see
Yeah,
more of. He had 18 points. He was a game best plus 24. And he really is actually probably their third best creator on the team, but
yeah,
didn't play as much due to defensive reasons earlier in the playoffs and even going back to last year's playoffs. But he's made himself into a very solid shooter. He's 5 of 8 from 3, hit a couple of nasty step backs. He's very reliable and can do something off the dribble against a closeout as well. And so getting him in there, because especially with Haliburton off the floor, and our first thought was that maybe play Isaiah Joe more, and he's kind of more of a complement to Shai because of his guard screening. But then I think really, they have come to the conclusion that going at the bigs, especially in those bench units, is even more profitable because you can really get to the rim on those plays. So Wiggins really makes more sense than Joe does because he then can give you a little bit more size and a little bit more ability to attack the basket, and not really that much worse as a shooter. So the realization that he could survive defensively very easily as long as he just played with good effort, I think was big, and because he can be very solid on offense. Aaron Wiggins had a 40-point game this
I mean,
year.
so
Granted, it was in
just
a bullshit game, but still. And then, yeah,
Aaron Wiggins. So rookie year, he shot 30% from three. Second year, 39%, then 49% last year and 38% this year. But the big story with Wiggins there is so he had these two big shooting years the prior two. He was taking 3.5 per 36 minutes. This year, 7 per 36. That's more than
yeah,
Aaron Nesmith did, made 38%. So Wiggins making threes at volume, like that's something that he has added to his game. So the Thunder have incorporated more, and it's a big part of his success. He only made one 2-pointer, but it was an awesome layup kind of around Pascal Siakam. And so Wiggins, he's not going to shoot 5 of 8 in every game, but he is a very good shooter. He has, as you mentioned, that size, which can help out defensively. And so he can be a difference maker. And the other reason why Wiggins, and we talked about this a little bit after game one, is so useful against the Pacers is that they don't have a sufficient volume of capable defenders. So the more players you can put on the floor, you're going to get somebody who has an advantageous matchup. It is a sort of
particularly if he's able to drive a closeout.
right. So it's sort of a version, not the same type of players, of what the Celtics have been able to do. Of like, okay, you have a number of guys who can do something with the ball in their hands. Somebody's going to have an advantage. And sure, it's great if you have 5 guys, like at times the Celtics can. But if you have 3, then against a team like the Pacers that typically isn't playing 3 or definitely 4 high level defenders at any one time, well, somebody's going to be able to have something. And Wiggins can drive a closeout, but also he can hit the open shots. You have to account for him, and so he definitely has a place in the rest of the series. And I'm interested because we also saw a little bit of Kenrich Williams in the competitive portion
Yeah,
playing
he
power
was good.
forward.
He
Yeah,
was plus 15 in 7 minutes, and he had 2 offensive rebounds, 4 overall. Like I thought, Kenny Hustle, he was one of those guys who did really tell with the effort in this game relative to what the Pacers were able to do.
he did. And so again, another we got asked in the playback like, have any Thunder players been crucibled? And I said not overall. I mean, there have been points where like Isaiah Joe has struggled and a few other guys, but not for the overall playoffs. And so they have it's such a luxury that they have these guys that can be a little bit dormant in some other series and then can kick into gear and that are good enough players where they don't have the same weaknesses as some of the equivalent guys on other teams, including the Pacers. And so it can be a Kenrich Williams series or stretch. It can be a Joe or a Wiggins. And the Pacers just don't have as many of those buttons because most teams don't.
So where else do we need to
Um,
go from here then?
we should talk a little bit about the third quarter. And so the third
Hmm.
quarter, both teams scored over 30 points. And a big part of why is because there were so many fouls early on. And some of this was the refs at halftime. It was an exceedingly low foul first quarter. The third quarter took more than 10 minutes longer than the first quarter. You can actually, this is a way to see that in the official box score. And a big part of why is the Thunder committed 3 fouls in the first minute, then a fourth a couple minutes after that. So basically, the Pacers were shooting free throws for the remainder of the third. So that's a part of it. And so the Pacers took in just that third quarter, they took 14 free throw attempts. That is more than half of the 26 that they got in the full game. But not to be outdone, the Pacers got the Thunder, or the Thunder got themselves, however you want to find this, into the bonus a little bit later. But then the Pacers actually committed more non-shooting
Oh,
fouls after the Thunder were in the bonus. So the Thunder took 14 free throws too, and they made 13 to 14 as opposed to the Pacers who made 11.
Pacers committed 6 Pat Bevs in the game. That would be that would be non-shooting fouls in the bonus. So that's just like 12 points that they gave up for free. And some of those are Shai like trying to keep him in front. That's how he got a lot of those points. But yeah, and Jalen Williams got a couple of those too. Number one on the list to me for Rick Carlisle here is just how to get Tyrese Haliburton going. I liked that he played him as the lone point guard. You and I have talked a lot about, why does he have to play McConnell and Haliburton together and Nembhard? Why don't they put him on the second unit? And so they tried a couple of different things. One was basically the kitchen sink approach without Haliburton on the floor at the start of I think it was the start of or end of the third, maybe it was
I
start of the
think it was
second, but
the I think it was the end of the third.
yeah, and right when Haliburton was on. So it basically was McConnell, Nembhard, Mathurin, Siakam, and Turner. Basically, just every good offensive player that they have outside of Haliburton. Now, I think playing McConnell in those minutes kind of defeats the purpose because of the McConnellization factor. I actually, if you're going to give the ball to McConnell all the time and have him on the floor, like you just let him control the offense. But OKC is generally not going to get beat by some of his stylings of like pushing the ball up really fast in transition, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean,
And yeah,
incidentally, the way that you could do that is the way generations ago, Oklahoma City Thunder did that with Russell Westbrook, where okay, he's gonna change the offense in this way, but you put a lot of defense around that, and you say we're gonna do the best we can to stop it. But the Pacers don't have that kind of defensive personnel.
no, and so McConnell did hit his second three of the series
Okay.
in the corner. Um, yeah, the second one that he took was apparently a two. Danny, you'll be pleased to know he's only credited with 1 3 in the box score, but
Oh, that second shot though was horrendous.
yeah. But it was noteworthy that when Haliburton did get going at the start of the fourth quarter, when he scored the 9 straight points, let me just confirm this here, that eh, at that point he was no, okay, never mind. Yeah, I was going to say he was the only point guard, but the stats do not support that. That was he did some of that at the start of the fourth. He only had 3 points when he was the only point guard. But I think they should go back to more of that because just force him to be the guy who makes the play. And because it's too easy for him to be like, I'm kind of getting denied. Like we ran one pick and roll. I got off the ball. I've done my job. But unfortunately, just making the quick pass to a guy with the tiny advantage, someone like Neesmith is not really going to be able to drive into the lane and take advantage of that. Even Siakam has kind of struggled with that some, although they certainly need to do a much better job of getting Siakam involved when Haliburton is off the floor. Again, just letting him touch the ball, right? Like when they were struggling to score without Haliburton in the first half, he's like not even touching the ball in these possessions. But in any event, I think there does need to be a little bit more deliberate of an approach by Haliburton. I was actually encouraged that he took a bad shot in the fourth quarter. He had Toppin open one more and he took a kind of contested corner three. But I think that's what he's going to maybe need to do because OKC, like it's pretty clear given the 2 regular season matchups and this one that A, he naturally is not really going to get going that well. And B, they've had too many times where they really struggle and him taking in a larger role of the offense. And again, I think a lot of that just comes from don't necessarily pass it as early. Don't get off the ball as early. Really draw 2 before you make the pass, as opposed to, hey, I kind of drew a second guy over here, or maybe they switch and that I'll throw it to this guy Pop and he's got a little bit of an advantage. I'll trust him to make the play. He needs to, I think, be a little bit more selfish early in the possession so that he can be unselfish later and really make the pass that's leading directly to the shot instead of just getting the machine going because the Thunder can shut that down in a way that some of the guys from, say, New York or Cleveland weren't capable of doing. And you don't have like little post ups you can get against the Thunder and stuff like that. That has really made the Pacers offense so difficult to stop until now.
Well, and in terms of the beautiful game in the first 3 quarters, the Pacers had 21 assists on 24 made baskets, but they only had 24 made baskets when the Thunder had
Yeah.
32. And so you kind of you can play it as beautiful as you want, but you need to actually score.
Yeah, and again, like a lot of those shots that they're getting out of these are above the break threes, and I think like some of these guys, if you're really like setting them up for wide open looks, that's one thing, but the Thunder are really good at closing out. And maybe this is gonna work. Maybe Haliburton will turn it over. Like he still, despite the fact that he wasn't necessarily that involved, he had 6 assists and 5 turnovers in this game. Like guys like Shai had this amazing play where Haliburton got the ball. Shai jumped up in the air to deflect a potential skip pass. Haliburton dribbled past him, and then Shai caught him from behind and stripped him right as the next help defender came over. So there are a lot of those type of plays. Like he may just have to accept that it's not going to be as clean as it normally is against these guys, and they can just trust that if he does turn it over, the Thunder will blow the transition chance, as they always seem to in the series. And credit to the Pacers for the way they get back too. So that would be one thing. Run him more as the only point guard, and just force him to do more if you have to. And I think like Siakam too. Like I would like to see him working against Shai more. I know it didn't work great, but they should look to that more. I think they will get their transition going at some point in this series. There will be some lapses from OKC, but not many. I don't know, any other adjustments you could think of for Indiana?
I mean, just the play harder one. We've already talked about it,
Yeah.
but that's gonna be essential. And I think that we've pretty much gotten all of them. And
Well, I
maybe
would say just forget about Thomas Bryant.
yeah, I was gonna. That's the what I was gonna say is more top end Siakam just because the other stuff doesn't work and you can go to it. And so at least
Well,
at least
and also, frankly, I would just and try to just play Turner more. Also, now
oh of
he would have
course.
got to maybe 31 minutes, but again, like it's interesting, right? Like the Pacers, we've been critical of them for not playing their stars as much, but they, have worn teams down over the course of the series. Like OKC, I don't think they're going to get worn down. They have bodies upon bodies to throw as well. The only guy who might possibly get worn down would be Shea, and he certainly looks quite indefatigable right now. Like he's not just exhausted at the end of these games the way Brunson or Mitchell was. Like he's got 34 points, and he also has enough juice to like play in their help defense and get 4 steals too.
Yeah.
And also, let's keep in mind too that this is a series where there's only one day break. Everything else is two. Like that really matters also. So I think with that reality, both for your own guys and the fact that you're not going to wear down the other team, I think you may just have to finally start, Shepard 13 minutes, like the McConnell fewer minutes. Like now I will say Tyrese was looking pretty exhausted by the end of that one stretch, as I mentioned. So maybe that's a concern. But I think Turner to me is the one guy. Like they're only -4 with him in, and that was some of the stuff that was during the competitive portion, right? Like they made up some at the end of the fourth quarter in garbage time. So to me, like he's the guy who just they need to play him more because that's the only way they can defend these guys. And even then, it wasn't looking great.
But it's their best chance. And yeah, I thought
Yeah.
Turner had some really nice moments overall. And because he's so central to their defensive success and is a capable offensive player who can challenge the Thunder in that way. So yeah, I think Turner, you should play as many minutes as you feel comfortable playing him, and then you should play him more than that because you're too comfortable. Like that. That's just he's the difference maker in that. Like and because the replacements for him are not nearly the same. And so yeah, I'd like to see that and less Bryant, less of their more limited guys because they're not all around players. They're not two-way guys. And so they're not perfect strategies, but it's the best that you can do. And I think that, you picked 5 games, I picked 6. The Pacers, of course, already have one, but I think we're going to get a really good sense in the first half of game 3 of which of us will be closer to the pin.
Yeah. And this is not, again, like obviously our prior was that OKC was going to win. And we've seen that basically 3 of the 7 competitive quarters have gone about how we would have expected. But I mean, to be the biggest issue is they don't have. There's 2 issues. They don't have an answer for Shea, and then they're not getting the easy stuff that makes the Pacers the Pacers. And they have a very good half court offense, but I don't know that their half court offense is going to outscore the Thunder's half court offense. Because the Thunder have a better defense than the Pacers do. And so we'll see. I mean, obviously things could change. The Thunder haven't had a bad shooting game yet. I do think the Pacers need to force them to take more threes. than they have, and they need to load up on Shai a little bit more. I think like something along those lines is going to have to happen because he just absolutely had his way in this game. He's getting whatever he wants right now, and that's I think you need to introduce some variance into the Thunder offense. If you just let him do whatever he's going to do, like he's going to score 34 points, he's not going to turn the ball over. He might take 30 shots to get 38 points, but it's still going to be pretty good, and he will set up other guys. So, like, there's only so far that he's going to fall. So, to introduce the variance that you might need to win more games, get the ball out of his hands more. And obviously, the Thunder have seen plenty of that, and they've beaten it. So they're pretty good. They are a pretty good team, and we'll see if the Pacers can counter in the next one. Let's continue our scouting series now and discuss another projected top 10 pick, point guard Jeremiah Fears out of Oklahoma. Danny, give us some of the basics on Jeremiah Fears.
Fears from Joliet, Illinois, bounced around a bit for high school basketball, was originally a low 5-star, but was in the high school class of 2025, reclassified to 2024, dropped down to a 4-star, around 40th in the recruiting services, but it's always hard with reclassified guys. Was originally going to Illinois, then committed to Oklahoma. And his dad played college ball at the University of Ohio. Older brother, Jeremy, I think his name is Jeremy, plays at Michigan State. Fears did not play, in part maybe because of reclassification. He didn't play the big senior high school games like the Hoop Summit, but he did play in the under 18 AmeriCup for the USA. And then we can get to the measurements. Fears 6'2.5" without shoes, so we would usually say 6'4" in shoes. 180 with a 6'5" wingspan, 8'2.5" standing reach, and rookie year will be his age 19 season because Fears was born October 2006.
Yeah, so decent measurements for a point guard, not great. 180 is pretty light, but we have to remember again that he's not going to turn 19 until October.
Right.
And so one of the younger players, not quite as young as Cooper Flagg, who also reclassified, but Flagg reclassified earlier than Fears did. Fears actually played AAU in the spring of 2024 before I think he had formally reclassified. So that's why, he wasn't in any of the senior all-star games, McDonald's, Hoop Summit, any of that. And so not as much high-level experience necessarily. Physical profile, I would consider it very good for a point guard. Not absolutely elite athleticism in terms. Sorry, what did you say?
No, I was agreeing with you.
Okay, yeah, not absolutely elite athleticism in terms of ability to finish at the rim. Like, he's not going to go up and dunk on people necessarily. Like, not as much of a 2-foot leaper, but can definitely move off of one. He's got some Euro step game. He's pretty good at changing speeds, stop and start in a straight line as well, and also change of direction with the ball is very good at, as we'll get into more. So you can see that he's not that strong yet, not that physically developed, still only being 18, being 180 pounds. And, in terms of the wingspan, that's like fine for a point guard. 6'5" is about average. Probably, I would say, we'll have to see whether he could maybe switch on to shooting guard. So, he played mostly off the ball defensively just because they had a bunch of guards, and those guards were better than him at guarding the ball, as you might expect for an on-ball freshman point guard like this. So definitely a solid athlete overall, I would say. Just pretty quick reflexes, pretty quick twitch most of the way. But yeah, I would say more on the smooth end of the scale than, really just nuclear. But it's in terms of his best athletic attribute, it probably is his ability to accelerate in a straight line and then slow down. And his top end is pretty good. So
it is.
That's what there is in the physical profile. Anything to add there?
A couple things. So if people want to have kind of a mental image of what he's built like, it's pretty similar to Trey Mann. And then he's thinner than Kobe White right now, but Kobe White played in college for longer. And so it wouldn't be surprising if by the time Fears is Kobe White's age, that their build is pretty similar. So
I don't know if he played in college for longer. I think they both played 1 year, but
maybe he was
older.
Yeah, that could be right. And so, And then the other thing that was fascinating about Fears in the athletic testing at the combine is that he did well in the vertical. And I was just like, I was surprised by that because then, and so I did part of my Fears work kind of around the combine, then did some after, was that he is a good to very good athlete, but the vertical element of it, you don't really see in his film. Fears, he only attempted 10 dunks on the year, though I think this one was taken out for a foul. The only one that was like, ooh, he's really vertically athletic was he tried to dunk on the entire UConn team at one point. I think it was a foul. I don't think it was a missed dunk. That was cool, but you don't see that much from Fears. He also had, I think he had like 4 blocks total on the entire year. So you don't see, and most of those blocks, I watched all of them, weren't like he skies for a block, and you don't really see it a ton in his jumper either. So
Yeah. You,
I
you had time to watch all 4 blocks?
it didn't take too long. And so so with Fears, so I think that you see his athleticism in the other areas more, like as you said, like his straight line speed with and without the ball. That's good. His lateral, like we'll talk about his defense later on. I think that's more fine than great. But yeah, definitely a good enough athlete to do everything that he needs to do. And considering I took us off the rails at the beginning of the last one, I'm going to let you pick where we kind of start on Fears.
Well, I actually, I'm trying to stay disciplined right now because I do. It's very, it'd be very easy for me to go off the rails myself here with yeah. But we're Chicago basketball's been bad enough lately. We're gonna have to claim Joliet as part of it too. But finally a Chicago point guard, and I think where I want to start with him is just his handle is unbelievable.
It's very good.
It is so good. I mean, probably if you're we've been doing this in earnest since 2015. Of the handles of point guards that we've evaluated in that time, in the top of that list, I'll go back a little bit earlier, but obviously everyone knows Kyrie had a great handle. Darius Garland was known to have a great handle, but you only saw it for the 5 games he played in college before he got hurt, so he can't really be on this list. John Morant would have to
Mhm.
be on that list as well. As anyone else come to mind for you of just like amazing handle point guards at the college level? You know,
Markel Fultz. But I
yeah, I would say I mean, because he was 6'5", right? There's a different level there. Like it was his panel was very good for 6'5", but I would put this even at a level beyond that. I mean,
yeah,
he had more just like straight ankle breakers, maybe than anyone, honestly, that I can remember. And he was playing in the SEC too. He's not
right.
playing, and he's doing this at 18. Not John Morant is basically. Think, yeah, Ja is like 14 months older than him at the draft. So that's and had played 2 years in college instead of one. So like, not only can he just has a great handle in tight areas, he could do everything at speed. He can go right, he can go left, behind the back, between the legs. Very creative. Maybe not quite as crazy creative as Ja, but I would say handle is a lot tighter. And the thing about him, even more so than like a Kyrie, is it's not just like some dribbling exhibition that goes on for 5 seconds and then he gets a jumper. He's
Yeah.
going places. He's beating guys. He's reacting. Obviously there are guys who've evolved their handle to be even better in the NBA. Like Shai would be one of those people, but Shai wasn't being talked about as one of the great handles in college. So this is just
Yeah.
comparing guys to where they were in college. Maybe Kemba Walker is in that
Mm.
conversation too, as another guy in the 2011 draft. But so and especially in transition too, like he doesn't need to slow down to make any of his moves. He can go between the legs at speed, behind the back. Then he also can change speeds as well. If he gets the guy, just gets his shoulder next to the guy, he's going to be able to probably beat him because he can change speeds and he just is very confident in his handle. Like obviously he's young. We'll get into just kind of how wild he can be, but that's the thing that stood out is like this guy's handle is unbelievable.
It's really good, and I appreciate how Fears, it's a functional handle. It's not just all show, and means that it can work well. And I mean, the transition that Fears, even though he played in what was the best conference in America last year, to the NBA is still a very real jump in terms of guards. I mean, you have that, like when I was trying to pick which film to watch for Fears, it's like, well, as good as the SEC was, there aren't like really surefire first round picks in the conference at his general position. And so you're going to have a big jump in athleticism, in talent, and in coaching, of course, as well. But he will get some of the benefits too. I mean, Oklahoma, they started out the year 13-0, but that was all non-conference, and then they just get their ass kicked for most of the SEC, which doesn't mean they were bad. It just means the SEC was really good. I think they set a record for most NCAA tournament bids for a conference, but as conferences are expanding, that's going to keep shifting. And so there are all these games where it's like he's playing fine or he's playing well, and then they're down 20 at halftime or early in the second half, and you're just like, oh, okay, well, I guess that's just what this is. But the place I want to go afterwards, and I teased Nate with this because as I said, I started my film on some guys earlier, was just that the way this happened. So Jeremiah Fears, I start with randomized film and then I watch a single game, which in this one was the game against Florida, who won the national championship. And I don't look at any stats. I do all of that stuff completely blind and just be like, what do I see? Because I don't want to be tethered to a prior. And I was like, I'm like, it doesn't go in every time, but I like Fear's jumper. It looks pretty clean, all this stuff. And in that aforementioned Florida game, they eventually win the title. 4 for 8 from 3, has a couple of good ones. I think he even had a pull-up 3 in that game. And so I was like, I didn't know that, I didn't think it was great, but I thought it was like a potential, like a strength in his game relative to some of the other stuff. And that ended up not being borne out by the stats or the subsequent film. That's the nature of randomized, is that you can sometimes end up with something that's a little bit better. And so overall, Jeremiah Fears, and I think why I want to go here after the athleticism and the handle is I think this is his swing skill. Is Fears overall 28% on 4.7 threes per 36. If you want to do the split, and this is interesting with him, Fears, he only took 61 catch and shoot threes on the year, but did make 36% of them. But then he took about the same amount of pull-up threes, and he made 20.5% of them, 15 of 58 versus 22 of 61.
Yeah, it wasn't very good in terms of the overall numbers. And even if you go back and look at the numbers from earlier in his career, they're remarkably consistent for being under 30% from 3. But his free throw shooting was very good, and he got to the line a lot too. So 6.3, I think it was per game, but it was a good rate.
Yeah,
And
I have it. It's 7.6 per 36.
Yeah. Okay. So there we go. So, and that's and he shot 85% on those.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing about his form that looks broken in terms of like the hand motion or anything. Like I don't think he's going to need surgery. The shot selection wasn't great off the dribble. Just like, and this will be a common theme with him, is just even though his skill level with the handle is ridiculously high, he's just so unpolished in basically every other area, even though you do see flashes, I would say, in nearly every other area. But part of that is the age, the reclassification. So you can kind of project onto this tabula rasa of what he might be able to be, just with more experience, more coaching, learning more competitiveness. Now, some guys never get that type of stuff. And so getting back to the shooting, yeah, like just his shot prep was not good. If he was shooting a 3 off the dribble, his footwork would really break down. He had some really bad misses in that circumstance. His shot selection would be bad. As soon as he would hit one, he just would go crazy, starting to shoot more. But when he could get those catch and shoots, if you watch those, he'd get his feet underneath him, shoot more of a set shot, and it looked fine. And of course, his free throws looked fine too. The other thing that was interesting is his off the dribble 2-point numbers were not terrible.
Right.
Again, this was just, as you watch the film of it, tremendously inconsistent. Sometimes he'd jump as high as he could, kind of almost double clutch it. Some of these are on the move. Like he shoots this floater that's like almost a jumper because he keeps 2 hands on the ball. Although the numbers on that were pretty decent too. Mm-hmm. And of course, with his handle, like his ability to shoot a 2-pointer off the dribble, it will be important. So ultimately, yeah, those numbers are kind of scary. Again, because he's so young, he's a very easy guy. I'm trying not to go too far, especially because, just like growing up in Chicago, guys like Jeremiah Fears were just like, that's where it was at in Chicago. Just like dudes with great handle, guards. Like that's what Chicago is famous mostly for producing. And he doesn't quite have the toughness or like the rebound. Like he doesn't really play particularly hard. He's not the will to win doesn't like jump off the
He
screen the
he
way it
he
would for like some of the famous guys
he doesn't
that
have the
grew up
he
in
doesn't have
Chicago. But
the Patrick Beverly grit. I'll put it that way. We'll talk about that
yeah,
later on.
yeah, or even someone like Isaiah, Derrick Rose, even like Rose was never a he had to improve his defense a lot, and also like Fears is not the level that Derrick Rose was as an athlete or strength or any of that stuff. Better handle though,
Mhm.
I would say. But Rose was just known as like an incredible winner, as like a quintessential Chicago point guard. So Jalen Brunson is another one of those guys too from the area who just kind of fits into that ethos where you don't get that from Fears. He's more just like smooth, scratching the surface. Like, is he gonna kind of figure it out and like really become someone who plays hard or not? It's just that's a massive question to me. That might even be more than the shooting as a swing skill. But so yeah, there's not a ton of like seriousness to his game at the moment. But like I think the shooting is going to be okay. Like there are a lot like compare him to say like Isaiah Collier. I would say it looked way better than someone like that, right? Isaiah
Yeah.
Collier, where you're just like, now is he going to be someone who's like, all right, the defense goes way under, I'll take it. I'm going to shoot 32% on these shots. Where it's like, all right, you dare me to shoot. Is it going to be like Ja Morant is another decent comparison, right? I would say Ja's jumper has probably disappointed me a little bit, I would
Mhm.
say, in the end, from where I thought it could be. Obviously, the rest of his game has worked out. Um, but again, Ja had another year of college experience, and he didn't shoot. Ja was always a kind of a low to mid 70s free throw shooter, not a 85% free throw shooter. So all those things to me, I'm not like it'd be lovely if he made more of those, but I'm not like scared of that aspect. Like I think I would project it as the most likely outcome to at least be fine for this type of player. And it actually could end up being pretty good. That wouldn't shock me either. I would be very surprised if it's just like, nah, the guy just can't shoot. It sucks. Like
Yeah. He
it's going to torpedo his career.
he's not going to be TJ McConnell. But I do, and so the catch and shoot for me, I think it's close. I want Fear's release to be a little tighter. His legs are a little wider than I prefer, but the mechanics, he's in the realm. It's not a circumstance of
Yeah.
like, oh, this is
He
just
just has
totally
to
skewed.
tighten it up. Like
Yeah.
that's I mean that's what it is for all of his game.
Yeah.
He does kind of do the like his set shot does look a little bit like Morant because he'll kind of lean his shoulders to
Mm.
the side a little bit, like turn his head sideways as he shoots it. Like so that's
But
it's slightly worrisome, but again, like I'm okay with it for this type of player.
so where we I don't even know if we disagree, but I'm just going to frame it differently. This will be a way we can talk about some of the other stuff in his game. Is that I think it needs to be a little bit more. It needs to be a little bit better than some of the other compatriots that he has, because I because that is what's going to be necessary, I think, to make some of the rest of his game work. Because Fears has a great handle, but I don't think he has great feel. I think he's a capable passer, but not a great one, and not a particularly intuitive player. And I don't think that Fears is a great finisher. Especially we've talked about his athleticism. Fears was about 50% on layups. 50% on layups for a guy of this player type is totally fine. But you didn't see a lot of those like awesome finishes, and players do get better at that. And so what worries me about if Fears jump shot, it's, let's say it's below average but not bad, that puts a lot more pressure on the rest of his game to generate advantages and then to maximize those advantages. And so I don't think it has to be great for him to be great, but I do think it has to be at least passable for him to be very good.
You mentioned the two aspects are the passing and the finishing. Which one of those do you want to talk about next?
I want to talk about passing next. And I think that it's for Fears. And again, we've brought up this idea of how young he is. And I think that his vision So I've been doing this vision mentality vocabulary split. So his vision, I think, is good. I don't think it's great. I think it's good. And he's fine. He can find guys outside of the action, but he's not passing guys open like fellow Oklahoma player, not Oklahoman, Trey Young. And so I think it's good there. I didn't see it as like the one of the best that I've seen. I do think that fears, and it's wild for a guy who is a true freshman, a young freshman, who had a usage rate over 31.5 per basketball reference, that I didn't think he played particularly selfishly. There were some tunnel vision plays, but for a player of this type, it wasn't that bad. And so I generally like the mentality. If he saw the pass, I think Fears would make the pass. It's just they didn't always see it. And then for vocabulary, using Jay Callaman's term, I thought it was fascinating because I think to continue the phrasing there, I think that for a young guy, Jeremiah Fears knows a lot of words, but he's not great at choosing the right word for the right moment. So that is a really challenging evaluation to make because there's part of me that goes, oh, well, he has some of these passes. That means that if he figures the stuff out mentally, he can make them. But then there's part of you that's like, well, it's a weird evaluation thing. Like he'll throw like a wraparound bounce pass when he could have done something else, and the wraparound bounce pass misses, and another pass would have gotten there. So but the biggest part of it. So I think I would pour him more in the realm for this player type of good but not great and not terrible. Is that combined with I think his feel, and yes, we have the context. I think his feel isn't fantastic. I brought up some other point guards, like Jaws come up at different points. I think that his feel, his overall passing skill set is below average.
Yeah, I don't know if I would call it below average. I guess again, it's all so raw, right? And so like most teams by the end of the year either were double teaming him in the pick and roll or they just had to switch. Because he was gonna, if he got into the lane, he was gonna carve them up pretty badly. They were very worried about that. And so I think he was pretty decent at if there was a double team happening, finding the roll man.
Mhm.
His passes to the weak side also, like I thought he got better as the year went along. This is kind of in the same realm with the finishing because a lot of times he would just get into the lane and then just throw up some crap and kind of get stuck. I thought he was a little more under control by the end of the year and would pick up his dribble and try to make a pass to the weak side. But his passes to the weak side, again, he's a little shorter too, but like just didn't have any steam on him, or they would be inaccurate at guys' feet. Same thing to the big a lot of times, or he would just auto throw the pass, so then it just wasn't there and he'd get picked off, or be behind a guy and they just wouldn't be able to corral it. Like I think seeing stuff, would be kind of a 7, and then executing it would be like a 3.5 or 4
Yeah.
at this point. Again, like some of that just comes down to not being that serious, not having that tight of a game, just not having like great fundamentals as a passer, and not being that strong to where you can actually like get some steam on the pass. So there, I think I agree with you. I don't think he played too selfishly. He would play selfishly in the sense that like he would just take bad outside shots early in the possession.
Mhm.
Once he actually got into the action, I think it was okay, and he did improve again, as you would expect for someone this young. So I think it actually could end up being better, but yeah, relative to like a Morant or a Trey Young, like he's way below that. I mean, Trey is I think the best college passer I've ever evaluated, and then because some of the other best guys came from Europe, like Luca and Jokic, who I did not evaluate, and then so Ja was very awesome as a passer. Like
Oh yeah.
Fears, you're not gonna have a really much of a sizzle reel for his passes. It's more just he threw like a couple, like if they were running a double screening action up top for him, he had a couple nice passes where he would just like sling it to the second big, roll into the basket, kind of through traffic, anticipating. So I do think it's something he can get better at, particularly because he's going to be able to get into the lane and he's going to be able to force a defensive reaction. A lot of guys can't necessarily do that, and so it puts more pressure on their passing. I think he should be able to at least make the play once he's caused the reaction reasonably well. But I didn't see passing as some like massive strength of his game, at least at this point. Um, the finishing, and also I think in terms of the handle, I wanted to get back to this too. I think he's just awesome in transition. He gets the ball in transition. Nobody's going to be able to stay in front of him. Like he'll get, unless you really load up, he will get to the basket. He's going to beat guys. If he has a head of steam, he doesn't need to slow down to go around them.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
as a
wait, on
finisher,
that
yeah,
front, on the finishing, the biggest mistakes he made in transition were just like choosing the wrong finish. Like he beats the guy and then he
yeah,
like tries a weird righty one when a left-handed finish would have gotten there. Those are the most common misses for Fears in transition, not some sort of like, oh, you beat the guy and throw up some, you don't beat the guy and throw up some crap like I criticized Ace Bailey for and some of the other guys in this class.
yeah. Like there was one play against Georgia. He gets a steal, is coming down, huge momentum play. There's like some little guard back, beautiful Euro step around him, and then he just throws the ball 20 feet in the air and like only hits the backboard. Like
Yep.
just because he just like flipped it over his head, and there was just it was like way too casual. Again, he just sort of was like missing that tightness to finish the play. And again, like finishing is one of the things that young point guards, young anybody, improves the most. And I thought the floater game was good. Again, he's sort of, sometimes you do this, sometimes you do this. There wasn't necessarily like a go-to move or two that he's perfected. There are just too many things on the menu that he just was like, and so again, it wasn't tight, right? It wasn't consistent every time. It wasn't just come to a 2 foot stop and pull up. It wasn't one hand floater. He would try sort of these like hook shots off the glass along the lane line that were of middling efficiency. He could go left as like reasonably well. He wasn't afraid to use his left hand, but that wasn't great either. He did get fouled though, which was big, right? This is a lot of fouls for this sort of player, and he does actually, again, like while his game is not tight and he's inexperienced, he does have instincts in a lot of these areas, and one of them was drawing fouls. Like there was one play where there was a loose ball on the baseline. He beat the guy to it. The guy was out of control, still going after it. And so he just decided he was going to throw a shot up right as the guy was about to run into him and got a foul call on that, right? Which, bullshit play, obviously. I don't enjoy watching that, but that's the sort of play that's like available to you to just get 2 free points. And so he was pretty good at anticipating when guys were going to reach in, get to the foul line on plays like that, which again, with his handle, he's able to get guys into somewhat compromised positions. And then, he's not afraid of like going into guys contact on the offensive end, really, when he's trying to get a shot up. So, like, he's not, doesn't have incredible touch, doesn't have incredible athleticism. But it's still, I would say, solid athleticism and size, and also his
Mhm.
ability to get there is massive because he's going to be largely under control. He's able to beat guys, and he just got to improve the rim reads, become a better passer in these circumstances too, which I thought he improved at throughout the year. So again, it's not something I'm worried about. It's not like an unbelievable strength. I think it's going to take a while to come to fruition, really. Like it could, I think he's going to look just in general very bad early on in his career, other than just having some amazing handling highlights. But it's not, again, it's, I think it'll be fine. It's not going to be great. It'll be fine.
Is there more stuff you want to talk about offensively, or do you want to go to defense?
Um, yeah, I mean,
Oh,
didn't do a ton off the ball,
oh, I
as
thought
a
he was.
cutter.
There were times that he
Yeah.
was way too inactive. Like there were a couple possessions in the Alabama game I was watching earlier today where Fears is off ball. He's standing in the corner and like does nothing. Now, some of that could be scheme, could be coaching. It's hard to know. But where he's just not really engaged and
Yeah.
young guy on the ball a lot. Maybe he needed to rest a little bit. You also see that lack of activity defensively. We'll get to that in a second. But then the other thing in terms of the building blocks that I like, there were a couple of moments when I was watching the pull up jumpers, more the 2 pointers. Like there was one play where Fears did a spin move into something that was pretty close to a Dirk fade. And I'm just like, what the hell is going on here? In mostly a positive way, because it's just like, well, at least he has this enough that he's trying it. Like it's not a shot that most guys would think of. And so Fears you talked about the refinement and the tightening up of his game. That's true. But there's also this element of like build that he has a familiarity with advanced parts of the game that a lot of guys his age don't. And
Yeah.
like I said before, with some of the passes that with the passing vocabulary, I think I'm more intrigued than discouraged by that. But I think my line where that will transition, hopefully this isn't the case, is about 2 years into the NBA. So if at that point he's still trying some of the stuff, it's looking bad and he's not doing it, then I'm going to be like, oh, he's just taking bad stuff. But for now, it's like, well, at least he has it enough that he can like get into the motion of it. And that connected with his handle is truly enticing.
Yeah, there's not a lot of guys who have this level of creativity, and it could be a detriment to him at this nascent point at his career, but it could be at a point where he just has unlimited moves to beat you, and he has unlimited moves now. It's just he hasn't really refined that many of them.
Well,
Yeah,
I thought of one more. So again, I mentioned I was
yeah,
watching the Alabama game today. He gets Grant Nelson, who's a big at Alabama. Fears gets him on and threw a switch, and Fears works to the basket, but he doesn't really ever beat Nelson. And so Nelson's there. Fears tries like this super high kind of like pitching finish that hits high on the backboard, doesn't really have much of a chance of going in. And that is another one of my concerns because he is a very good athlete, but I think of him more as the like stronger, like top speed than like super like do you how like his first step is good, but I don't think it's like preposterous. And so there are these plays where you're like, okay, it's looking good, but in the half court in transition, I 100% agree with you. Where it's like, especially considering and bigs in particular are so much better in the NBA. Where it's like, I wonder that he's gonna, especially if the jumper doesn't come around, that he's gonna be able to just burn those guys.
yeah. That'll be a big part of the jumper too. Is if teams switch on him, he's going to need that mid ranger because I don't know that like his handle is good enough to create the separation, but I don't know if he's going to be so good as a finisher that he's going to be able to like blow by a big on a switch and beat him to the rim. It's more just he can break his ankles, get some space, and then get himself a wide open 2 point jumper in that
Mm,
circumstance. But he's got to be able to knock that down. Overall, I would say in terms of the floor game, we can get into the nuances of the defense in a second. Just didn't play that hard. There would be moments when he did play hard that it would actually look good. I mean, those were very few and far between. I mean, in all the film that I watched, I would say there were maybe, 10 times that I saw him actually slide as fast as he could
right.
laterally. Like he's just another of these guys. He's fast, and like if he would get screened off and he'd be trailing the guy again, they always stashed him on the worst perimeter player on the other team. But if he got switched on to someone or had to come off a screen and he got screened off, he could accelerate and get back into contact with them. But and in the post, he would try to front guys if he got switched onto him. He would, and his steal rate was actually kind of high given sort of the lack of effort that he played with. He could break on the ball. I thought it was interesting that like he would at least execute their scheme of denying out on the floor, forcing passes further out on the floor, if that was part of it. Even if he wasn't in a stance, he always looks casual, but he still is just such a good athlete that he still can move that way.
Yeah.
And then when they would go to pressure, a few of his big steals came when they were down in games and they were really trying to pressure up. And so when he added that little level of desperation of trying to come back, he really made some very nice defensive plays. But you can also count on one hand the number of times where, even though they're in theory trying to pressure, that he like gets down into a stance and gets chest to chest with the guy. He'll kind of just be standing there. And again, he would still like get some deflections just because he was, just a quick reactor, and he would at least get his hands straight over his head and deflect some passes sometimes, or he could make some great plays in the passing. Like there was one play where someone tried to steal or tried to save the ball on the other team. And as they tried to save it, they threw it in the backcourt. Fears was maybe at the 3 point line on the defensive end. He sprints past two guys who are in between he and the ball into the backcourt, gets it and gets a dunk.
Yeah.
So he'll have these anticipation plays where again, you're like, yeah, this guy actually has pretty good instincts when he applies himself. But again, as I think you're probably going to get to, there's just not a lot of intensity, a lot of physicality on a possession to possession basis.
Before we get to that, there was a play
Yeah.
in the Arizona game, which I think was in that battle for Atlantis and Bahamas in the preseason, where Fears just broke on the ball for a pick six, and you're just like, it kind of felt like it was in place for this Oklahoma City team, and you're just like, oh shit, like it really works, and there are a few of those moments with him, whereas for some young guys there are none, and so a few is better than none, but it's a lot worse than more frequent. And I like what bothered me about Fears was that his motor wasn't consistent. Like, so sometimes there are guys who it's just like, their motor never turns over. And so you just like, well, maybe if a different coach or different situation can activate it, that you could piece together. When a guy can try hard and typically doesn't, sometimes it bothers me a little bit more. And one of the other, you brought up desperation, which is a fantastic point. One of the other times you saw that was Fears would get beaten on a cut or get beaten on a screen and would just work hard to get back. And he wouldn't usually get back in a way that would, like get a block because he only had 4 blocks on the year, but make life a little harder. There was one of those where he had kind of gave up a drive to Mark Sears, who's the point guard for Alabama, and then he recovered well enough to contest the shots. Sears missed the finish, and so like you see those types of plays, and but and I think that maybe a different scheme could show some things with Fears, but like we didn't have a lot of film of like what happened. Can he like screen navigation because they did a lot of switching, they did a lot. He wasn't guarding the other team's main threats, so there are elements of Fear's physical game where you think like, oh, he could be okay at that, but we don't know because we haven't seen it all. So I'm going to be very interested, and again, it'll be early in his tenure. Like, what does his defense look like at summer league? Like some of those type of things where you're in a different system, playing with teammates, and like hopefully trying to impress people. But you brought up the steal rate, 3.1%. He had 54 steals on the season. Like that's pretty good. And I a lot of times we're looking for over 2%, and 3% is meaningfully larger than two. Basically, didn't have any blocks on the year, and even though he's a good vertical athlete testing wise, so and like in terms of feel, it was a mixed bag. I mean, the one that cracked me up the most of his steals, because just how these things get credited, was there was a play where Fears completely lost his guy on a cut, but then the pass to the cutter went over the cutter's head and Fears caught it. So that counts as a steal. And I'm like, this is horrendously negative film, but it was just funny to see it. But that's, because in the very nature of it is like, if there's if there's a live ball turnover, someone has to get credit for it. And so it was the guy who got beat.
Yeah.
And so for as you said, he didn't get into stance, didn't slide very well, or didn't do it consistently. When he did, there were times where it looked okay. And but there were more plays than that where it just like got smoked, whether that was losing a guy on a cut, losing a guy on a screen, or just like there was one against Texas A&M where it's just a straight up drive and the guy just goes right past him. And that's a concern. I mean, the physical comps I brought up were for in terms of the shaped body, Trey Mann and Kobe White, neither of whom were great defenders. And I think that there is a possible, and I think that Fears, he has a fairly small frame. I think he will get bigger than he is, but I don't think he's ever going to be particularly strong. So that makes it actually, this might seem counterintuitive, but that makes it even more important that he's physical and gets his chest on guys, because that's the only way he'll be able to survive. And so getting those things, but I mean, he's 19. His rookie year is going to be his age 19 season. He can do it. He just didn't. And we'll have to see what happens.
Yeah, there just is. He doesn't know how to play hard yet, and
Yeah.
that maybe he never learns that. Some guys don't really learn it. Some guys it takes them 8 years to learn it. Some guys learn it when they're 30.
Right.
Uh, Brooke Lopez didn't become a good defensive player until he was 10 years into his career, for example, or even someone like Trey Young is like just now learning to at least maximize what he can be physically, which isn't much. And so I think Fears just has no idea how to play hard, especially like there's during the Georgia game, he had a spate of 3 straight turnovers, and he just like he'd throw this terrible pass and then just like, yeah, kind of jog back, right?
Yeah.
Like there's no sort of like, oh, I fucked up, I better make up for it. Like you don't really see that kind of a mentality for him at all. But yet, again, some of the feel stuff that he had while not even really playing that hard was remarkable, right? If he gets this many steals, basically none of his steals came from on ball, getting into a guy, knocking the ball away, getting a strip. Every once in a while, he'd come over and help and get a strip, but usually it would be if there was kind of a loose pass or a pass in the air. That's how most of his steals would come when he could break on the ball. As a rebounder, averaged like not a ton of rebounds, but they were playing a bunch of small guards. And so he would at least, unlike the last guy we watched, Trey Johnson, when a shot would go up, Jeremiah Fears would at least run towards the defensive backboard. And he wouldn't like jump into the mix at all, but just by being close and then moving towards the ball, not even really jumping, but just running towards the ball if it was a long rebound, he was able to get a few rebounds. He absolutely never would actually jump for a rebound or get in there among other players and really fight for a rebound, but he would just run rebounds down and then
Yeah.
of course to get into his fast break game, which was awesome. And then also I thought he again showed good awareness overall, where he's turning his head. If a shot went up and he had inside position, he would at least be looking back at his man, looking at the ball, seeing whether he needed to box out. He wasn't like the most physical box out guy, but he at least like understood that he needed to do that and that he needed to have an awareness. I thought like his head was moving a lot defensively as well, like just to see ball and man. Like he wasn't like he would have a few times where he'd get lost, but it wasn't he didn't just show zero understanding. Like he showed the understanding, he just wasn't able to like be physical and make the effort, and he just doesn't know how to play hard yet. But I think again, it's kind of the same thing with the passing, where I think he has the brain for a lot of this stuff, and he has a natural understanding on a lot of these things. It's just like he's a baby. Like he just and so yeah, it's very easy to project onto that.
But
And so like what is your ultimate feeling on what his defense will be if you had to compare him to some of the point guards that are out there? Like where does he fall in that hierarchy, both as a most likely outcome and then best case scenario?
so I think that he, so these might seem incongruous, but I'll read two of my notes. Um, Needs to play with more urgency defensively, and at least he's active. And I think that that's the nuance of kind of where Fears is probably going to end up, unless he takes this big leap. Is that he he has the physical tools to be capable. I think he tries enough to not be just completely destroyed the way that like the worst defenders in the league are. The Hardens, the Trey Youngs. I don't think that he will necessarily like force you to use a specific scheme because he's so bad. But considering he's thin, and I think he will always be some version of thin, and has was it like 6'5", 6'6" wingspan, 6'5" wingspan. I think that he will probably be guarding the other team's weakest or second weakest threat pretty much all the time, and there will be times that he is hunted. So I would say expected value is below average for the position, but definitely not the bottom quartile. So probably if the 25 to 50% is the place. But because he's quick, and because if some of the feel stuff comes around on both ends of the floor, he gets coached up. I don't think he's going to be. Then maybe you're talking 50 to 75th percentile. Maybe there's a twinge of chance that he's a little bit better than that, but like he doesn't have the tools, the long arms, the feel of some of the best of the best. So yeah, I'd say I expect 25 to 50th percentile for this kind of role, and it could be 50th to 75th if he really kicks into gear.
I think that's a really good way of putting it. Just to throw some names out there, right? Like he's not even compared to someone like Tyrese Haliburton, who has way longer arms, massive steal rate in college. For more of these kind of shorter guys, it really depends to me how strong he can get. Again,
Mhm.
he's so young. I think his frame doesn't look just like tiny.
No.
I like Darius Garland, and he's similar numbers to Darius Garland in terms of size. I think he's got more athleticism, more just raw speed than Garland. And the few times again that you see him actually really move his feet laterally, you're like, oh, he actually like moved pretty good there. I think he could be pretty decent on closeouts because of his speed. Again, relative to having the short arm. So I think he'll be comfortably above, if he even tries it all, comfortably above the Morant, Trae Young class of guy.
Mhm.
Lillard is a little bit different because he's at least strong. I don't, and he came in, of course, being pretty strong already. He's a 4-year college guy, but I think he'll be above the Lillard level. Kyrie really struggled early in his career defensively. Actually, has become pretty decent, but again, another one of these guys who really it wasn't until he got to Brooklyn, I would say, that he became what I would consider to be a quality defender for, again, a higher usage type of guy. And he actually wasn't in the greatest shape in his career at times. And he got himself into awesome shape really for the first time in Brooklyn. And, someone like De'Aaron Fox, he had at least shown flashes of being like a big ball pressure guy, steals guy. Like that was kind of considered
Yeah.
a positive.
That was his
Tyrese
rep at the Hoop
Maxey,
Summit. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, Tyrese Maxey is someone who maybe could be kind of comparable to him. As I think Fears could
So
be better than some guys like
so
that. Like you mentioned White, I think he's got a little bit more instinct than someone like White. White maybe at a little bit thicker of a frame, again, being probably a year older when he was drafted. So as you look at guys on this list, I think he could be better than some of these guys in terms of making plays, and he is quicker, and I think he'll have a thicker frame than someone like Morant, who is always going to be like super skinny. So yeah, like you said, I think he could be like 25th to 50th percentile, and again, of course, when we include this, there's a lot of guys like a Jalen Suggs, okay, who are never going to have the offensive role
right.
that Fears is going to have. So among these sort of ball dominant point guard types, like I think he could be average to, and if it really works out for him, like I think he actually could be a quality defender. Again, I don't want to go ahead and project that, but I think that's a possibility.
Because there's other than the frame, there isn't that much that's holding him back. It's not the clear deficiencies or anything like that. And I'd also be interested, depending on what Fear's role is at different times in his NBA career, whether that kind of lends itself to building some of this, getting the effort more consistent, because that's going to be how he gets on the floor potentially in certain cases. If you see these athletic guys who didn't have accountability in college, sometimes they are the ones who that needs to happen with them at a different point to stick, or to stick, whether that stick as a starter or stick in a rotation, all those sorts of things. And you mentioned one of the players in that run on defensive guard, or run on guards defense, not defensive guards, that I think is the guy I thought about the most watching Jeremiah Fears, and that's Tyrese Maxey. And Maxey, and I think that's for a couple of different things that's interesting. Maxey actually, the numbers on him shooting in college are even worse than Fears. So Maxey was
Yeah,
31 point
although Maxey was known as a shooter before.
before
I
that.
wouldn't say
Yes.
known as a shooter, but he was known to be like a solid shooter
Yeah.
before he got
Yeah.
to Kentucky.
So Maxey only took 15 catch and shoot threes his year at Kentucky, made 27% of those. So that's actually slightly better, but the frequency is insanely low. Made 31.5% of 89 catch and shoot threes. So that's a few more. So he's a little bit more of the catch and shoot, right? But was even worse. And Maxey, to his immense credit, has worked a ton on his game. He has, the jump shot has, of course, become a completely different weapon for him on the Sixers than it ever was on Kentucky, even with the Calipari tax. And also Maxey, but so you have that growth and deserving most improved player, all that type of stuff. And then what has happened with Maxey, and there's some discrepancies. I'm not saying he's the same as Fears, but that once he got that to level, he becomes a part of a new conversation. And that would be a great step for Fears to get into some of the conversations that Maxey has earned his way into. But then his deficiencies in terms of feel and defensive capability, like to me, both of these guys they aren't the most intuitive natural point guards. And so then those deficiencies become more relevant. Now, you would love for Fears to have all these different elements come together to the way they have for Maxey. And so that's what's so interesting. And now there's a conversation about where does Maxey fit in on a great team? And he's definitely a starter, but can he be the guy who runs an offense and all this stuff? And so that is a double-edged sword when it comes to Fears, because the positive of it is that means a lot of this capability is in there, even if most guys don't progress the way that Maxey has to this point in his career. But my my concern, I was going to say my fear, that gets a little too close to the bone here, is that it lowers his absolute upside because the players who are like the best initiators, the really high end guys, you can see that feel, you can see that passing ability from the jump. John Morant, we've talked about a couple times in this. We saw John Morant. I was actually reading my notes on him a few days ago. We could see his passing in the film. You and I saw it. That was part of why we he was like one of the strongest number 2 picks in the entire time we've done Dunc'd on, and one of the highest point guard evaluations I've ever done is because he had that. Fears doesn't have the bones of that in his game. And so that in no way, shape, or form means he's a bad prospect, but it does mean that to me, like the best case scenario, all NBA upside, to me is a little bit more muted than some people might think.
Yeah, I mean, just to go back to what you were saying about Maxi, I don't know that he's like Jeremiah Fears is obviously a point guard. I think most people almost thought of Maxi as a shooting guard at this stage. That's why he went number 21 because he's point guard size, but he really was more of a shooting guard, and he still really is more of a shooting guard. Frankly, like
In
he
some
can
ways.
play point guard, he guards point guards, but he's not. He doesn't have this type of handle. Like he's Maxi can get going in a straight line really fast and beat guys and go right and score, and he can shoot amazingly well from deep. But that's except for last year. And but like Fears is just like, yeah, you can give him the ball. He's been a point guard all his life. He has this unbelievable like Maxi, I would say, is a well below average handle for his size.
That's fair.
So that to me, like I agree his passing is not awesome, but part of what makes you a point guard is just your handle is so good that you can get places on the floor and you can really run pick and roll, get to the spot, be like that's the number one job of the point guard, even more than it is distributing and passing, is just to like get you into your offense and bring the ball up and be someone whose handle is reliable and can get to spots on the floor, which I think Fears can. And I agree with you in terms of the upside. Like it's probably more all star than all NBA, and it's probably likely that he'll never win a championship. Like that's just the nature of small guards historically. There's only so much they can do because they're small, right? Like there's a reason that Dylan Harper is way higher on most people's boards and will be on mine than Jeremiah Fears because he's 6'6" and he's strong and he can defend a lot more. And it's just like being bigger and taller and stronger is very useful in basketball if you have the same level of skill. But to me, I think like Fears, I do think he has all-star potential. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I do. I think I'm probably it's a smaller chance than you, but it is a real one.
Yeah, well, I should say what I consider that chance to be, and then you can decide
Well,
whether.
I have some context clues here. I think we have a pretty good idea.
Well, just to be clear, again, as everyone knows, we don't discuss these in any way before the show. So as I think about him and I compare him to some of the other guys, Trey Johnson, a Knipple in his range, VJ Edgecombe, and I think I'm probably going to have him higher than the highest of those guys. Might
Oh,
even
okay.
have him in his own tier. I got to still think about that because like that. I think he has probably like the handle is just so ridiculous. And the thing to me, the things that he has as weaknesses can be improved the most, and or he's at least shown something in some of those areas where, and he also is so young as well and so inexperienced that you can project that out a little bit more easily. Like Trey Johnson, he just doesn't get by people, right? Like
Mhm.
that's just, and he also does nothing in the floor game. Like maybe the floor game could work out a little bit better because he's not totally unathletic, but he's never going to get by people. Like that's not. I don't see that as something he's ever really going to be able to do. Whereas Fears, nobody can stay in front of him. And he also like his transition game is going to be awesome. And then the shooting, I'm like, yeah, shooting is one of the things that most often improves. And the free throw shooting is there. Like you can talk yourself into that. The defense, yeah, like it's not going to be great. He may be a little bit thin. He's young, but he's at least shown like when he actually really tries, which is rare, but you do see some flashes there. And the passing, I think, is again very raw, but it wasn't a massive weakness. Like he's definitely is like making point guard passes. It's just like it needs to be tightened up a lot inside the arc, scoring, finishing. These are all things that guys just get better at and usually do. And now he's going to need to improve by quite a bit in all these areas to really become an all-star like I'm talking about. But he just has like a natural skill for basketball too. You don't have this kind of a handle at age 18 if you don't like understand how to play. Like
Mhm.
I don't think he's going to just be like some handling savant who can't do anything else. He has shown other instincts for things like the foul drawing. And so yeah, like I don't, part of my hesitance for him, and he would maybe even be higher on my board if I was like, "Oh, this guy's a great competitor," and we just haven't seen evidence of that. Like he's just gonna have to, he needs to go play for a JB Bickerstaff or something maybe to learn that. But that's again, we have seen guys improve in those areas. It doesn't mean that they will, but to me, like these other guys are shooting guards. He's a point guard. Like that, you're just shooting guard is a pretty fungible position. I think all Edgecombe, Johnson, Knipple, like they all have things where you're really putting a pretty hard ceiling on what they can be ultimately. And Fears, the only ceiling to me is just that he's a small point guard. But as far as like within his position, I think he could be very, very good. I think he could end up being one of the best at his position. Whereas, again, and a really good point guard to me is more valuable than a really good shooting guard. Like, that's just been the nature of things in the years and years I've been evaluating basketball. So to me, I think I would be betting on him above the shooting guards that we've looked at.
I have him preliminarily. We haven't finished our boards yet. I have him kind of in the middle of that group, and in part, it's funny. Like you would think, kind of given some of our proclivities, that for me it would be the shooting that would give me pause, and it is to an extent. Like it's a roll of the dice that could work out, couldn't. And I mean, if we're talking about differences between Trey Johnson and Jeremiah Fears, it's that I think Trey Johnson can be potentially a dangerous shooter on ball and off ball. And like you, I don't think that Trey's going to run an offense, but with Fears, the shot, it's a concern, but for me it's not necessarily the concern. It's the combination of feel, motor, and just kind of he doesn't have that kind of generating the other parts of generating shots for yourself and others pop that I really love to see in a high level on ball player. And he has the capability. Like the difference between Fears and a lot of the other point guards that I've kind of felt about, that I didn't see as like superstars, but I liked, was that they had a clear deficiency in one of these elements that I didn't think was going to get better. With Fears, they all can. It's just that those rolls of dice. And part of the reason I brought up Maxi is like Maxi has improved in a lot of areas, but he hasn't improved in all of them. And the deficiencies he still has are challenges. And it's fair to draw the distinction with handle and all that. But also, like, to me, I didn't see a ton of craft. And some of this is the scheme and system for Fears, like setting up screens in the pick and roll, like all that kind of stuff. And that refinement can and likely will come over the next 4 years.
Yeah, I think it will. Like it's really more about just having the
Yeah.
handle. Like that's like
It
nobody was really playing a drop coverage against him either.
Yeah,
So
but so for me, I think that it's totally fair. I understand where you're coming from, but to me, when you have that many different elements, that especially some of which that are just like, as you brought up, like learning how to play hard, where it's just like I like to see more at this stage. And yes, he's younger than a lot of these guys, but we've seen 18-year-old young guys who play hard. Like we've seen that before. And so I'm I think that for me, so like for me, the preliminary idea for me is that I have Trey and Knipple, and then probably have Fears between them and Edgecombe, who I don't. That's probably where I am right now. I'm not all the way. I want to think about this a lot more. We don't have to put our boards together for another few weeks, but and it really is about the like, is he going to be able to, if you're putting the ball in his hands to run an offense? And again, you brought up how it's the most valuable thing, but it's also the thing that if you're below a certain threshold, then you become a much less valuable player. Whereas I think
yeah,
that Knipple and Trey Johnson, they can be good versions of a guy that can fit in on a lot of different teams. And so The upside, I agree with you, is lower, and then the down, but and it's funny because it's not necessarily about floor.
You said the upside of the shooting guards is lower.
Yes, is lower. Yeah,
Okay.
it is, and but then they
Yeah.
also
But
like
well, for me, in the top 5 of the draft, that's pretty much answered the question. Like that's
yeah,
my
potentially.
philosophy. I'm drafting for guys I think are going to be stars.
Yeah.
I don't really care as much about the median outcome personally.
Yeah, and that's again a reasonable place. And for me, it gets a little different when I don't think a guy has like MVP or All NBA upside. Then I start to get a little bit more into outcomes. But for me, it's this idea that I'm not sure Fears is going to be a top 20, top 30, probably I think 20 to 30 is more reasonable offensive engine. And as comes up a lot when we're doing our NBA work, if he ends up in that 20 to 40 offensive engine, maybe even to 50, then that player is harder to use, and especially considering what he is on defense. Because, and I think the catch and shoot, also, I should mention, forgot to mention this, we're doing this. When I watched those catch and shoot shots, they weren't terrible mechanically, but they weren't great either. It wasn't like, oh, he's making all those. So I'm a little bit concerned if Fears has to play off ball at least some of the time, or he's just on a team that has a better on ball guy. Well, I don't think he fits super well at this point. That could be the impetus for these other things to get better. But considering his size, considering some of the mentality stuff that bothers me, it has to. And when something has to work for them to be viable, I get a little skittish. So again, I understand why you have more we do. We're not that far apart, but I wanted to convey that for what, and when we do our boards, we'll put the pen to paper on that.
Yeah, two things react to what you're saying. I think one, what you're saying about how his game could possibly improve. He's someone that, like, and I haven't heard any of the scouting stuff on this of just, the more, how does he interview? What does he seem like as a guy? Like, is he going to convince me that he is like a really, really hard worker? Or is he just one of these guys like, yeah, I love ball handling and like that's just what came naturally to me. And I'm really creative with that. But he's just like, because he's someone where his natural skills are so good that if he works at it, I think he'll pick stuff up quickly. And if he really is willing to put in the work on the jumper and tightening up his game to where like he has all these things that he can get to and they're all reliable as opposed to just because he has a pretty casual approach right now out on the floor, and with his level of creativity in his youth, like, you can excuse that. But in the interview process, or when you're talking to his coaches, like, finding out what kind of his mentality he has, does he work, at least on his own individual game at this point, because you don't necessarily see like a great competitor on the film, but that is common. I mean, John Morant would be considered a pretty big competitor, but he also, like, was incredibly lazy on defense in in college.
Oh yeah, he
Um,
still is.
and then so then on in terms of the, and I don't know that John, his skill level improvement has been a little bit disappointing. So that would be one thing, and then the second thing, I think you're being grading a little too harshly in terms of the passing. So I want to go through some of I'm going to go through some names on our top 10 point guards list and compare his passing to some of these guys at the, as far as I can tell, the same stage. Obviously, some of these guys we didn't evaluate, so I might be indexing on what they were as they first came in the league, right? So Damian Lillard, I would say that Fears to me is kind of ahead of what Lillard was early. Lillard again had this great gravity where he could always shoot it from up top, and then he could make plays out of that. And you're forcing two on the ball, and then he became someone eventually by his fifth, sixth, seventh year in the league where he could sort of. He wasn't necessarily throwing great passes, but he was always throwing the right pass because again he was sparking a reaction from the defense. Garland, we didn't get to see enough in college. He had an
I
awful
liked
rookie year.
Garland's passing way more than I liked Fears.
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, given where he has been early in his career, I would say Garland would have to be probably above him. Haliburton, again, was a kind of different ammo, wasn't running as much pick and roll in college, but everyone knew he was an awesome passer. Jalen Brunson is just a totally different kind of game. Brunson has never really been a great passer at the NBA level. I think I would put Fears ahead of where Brunson is. And also, again, like all of these things go in concert with one another. Like Russell Westbrook was not a great passer, certainly when he started. He became a very good interior passer, but most of his passing when he was at his peak was built around just for the fact that he could get where he wanted to and force a reaction from the defense. Steph Curry, I would say fears ahead of Steph Curry at a similar stage. Shai, I would say, is ahead of Shai, just with more reps on the ball and like being like having faced all these coverages and at least like knowing what's on the menu of some of the passes that you're going to make and at least trying to make them. Like how many times has Fears gotten doubled on a pick and roll up top and hit the big man? Like that's not something that most of these guys have done much at this stage.
So I think that the delineation, and I think Lillard is a good one to do this on, is that all of those other guys have something that is a bigger threat to the defense than I think that Fears does right now. So Brunson, it's his strength. Lillard and Curry, it's their shooting. Shai, it's kind of a different sort of game. And so that can open up the passing. And we've also seen some of them, their limitations passing have actually Brunson. We talked about this a lot in the Eastern Conference Finals. Like that is that the passing isn't the reason he's a great initiator. It's that it does enough within the scope. And then the reason that they're not like the same kind of dominant players, these other things, and then of course there are guys like Harden and everything else. Russ is interesting because I was extraordinarily familiar with Russell Westbrook in college, where his feel wasn't great, but he is just a preposterous athlete, like in a way that Jeremiah Fears isn't, both from a strength and an overall explosiveness. I mean, Westbrook was the vertical athlete that Jeremiah Fears testing sort of showed, but he actually did it every second of the day at least from when he was at Westwood. I don't for when he was at Westwood. I can't remember his high school. I mean, I saw him play in high school.
But my point is that he's better than a lot of these guys at this stage. Like he's better than De'Aaron Fox at this stage. He's way better than Maxey. He's way better than Jalen Suggs. He's not better than LaMelo. He's way better than Kobe White. He's better than Emmanuel Quickly, I would say, at this stage. Someone like Anthony Simons was not even really a point guard. I would say he's a little bit below Scoot, who I think Scoot's passing and creation has actually been pretty underrated so far in his career, if you actually look at the volume of what he's doing. So, like, I think he's not like quite on the level of just the absolute like most pure point guards coming in, but all those guys that I listed, he's definitely in the top half of those players, I would say. And I feel your point of, well, yeah, those guys do something more than him as a scorer. Like that's certainly, or a shooter, like that's definitely true. But I also think that he can get to these spots with the handle and still force a reaction from the defense in that way to where like the window should open up for him. And so, yeah, like it's definitely not great, but I think he's like a better passer than Kyrie when Kyrie came in, I would say for sure. Kyrie still isn't a very good passer, I would say, for given the gravity that he has. So that's the point I'm making, is that I think if the other stuff works, I think the passing will be totally fine and even good. Like that to me is not like, he's never going to be just like, oh yeah, he threw this 45-foot laser to a guy wide open under the basket that nobody saw, like Trae Young. Like, yeah, no, he's not going to be that. But I think the 2 levels down from that, I think we'll be fine. If everything else works, if he's a good enough scorer, if he's a good enough shooter, the passing will be totally fine to good. That's my feeling.
You feel free to not answer this because we could talk about it later. But since it seems like you have a pretty clear feeling on where Fear's game is I'll just throw out a couple teams, and I don't want you to evaluate all of them. But in terms of if there's a place in the general range that we think he might get drafted, that you think is a particularly good or a particularly bad fit for what you think Fears will be.
Let's see here. I mean, Utah, he's just a different level of player. Like they have Collier, they have Keontae George. I think if he were there as at Utah, I would definitely take Fears, just because he is a chance to be an all-star at this position, which they just don't have. Even though they are probably strongest at point guard, like that's okay. Like and he does actually kind of have something in common with Collier as well, but just they're different kinds of players. But I like George, Collier, like those, and George could play some shooting guard too. Like those are not guys that I'm scared to draft over the top of. I mean, this is probably a better conversation just for the offseason outlooks when we're talking about these
Sure.
teams. But that's one that comes to mind for me. I mean, certainly Pels at 7, they don't have a point guard. So like there are some teams that I wouldn't love him on necessarily. Uh, Philly just he kind of doesn't really make sense there with Maxi. But who's number 4? Charlotte. Yeah, Charlotte is
Charlotte.
number 4. They got fucking LaMelo already. Yeah, so I mean it's hard to see him going above 5. I think based on the guys we've done, he would be my pick for Utah at 5 right
Okay.
now. Over like a Knipple or a Trey Johnson, even though they are, among their prospects, they're probably strongest at point guard still. But yeah, and that's there could be some chemistry issues with them already having. This will be the 3rd year in a row they've drafted a point guard who at least is worthy of some development with George and Collier going ahead of him. But yeah, that I think he would be my pick there. We'll see. All right, that's probably enough on fears. We've gone almost 70 minutes on him, but Chicago point guard got to do it. But he's also just a fascinating player. Like point guards, certainly, I would say my biggest misses have been on point guards. I can be seduced by them a little bit more with the skill level than maybe some other positions, and that's also a position where guys develop late. Like he's going to be awful early in his career. Like the
Oh, yeah.
first, I'm sure there will be moments in the first 2 years. Like Darius Garland was the same way, right? There's so many guys we can point to. Like Ja was a different animal, although again he was a year older. But it's only like the most awesome. Like Fox had a terrible rookie year. Like I think a lot of these guys, you're just looking for flashes. Or even Trey, he had some big games, but he had a terrible rookie year, and then by the second year, it was very clear that he was going to be awesome. And yeah, I am. If we're talking about him in the top 3, like I don't think I can get him above Bailey just because of the player type that Bailey is. But I just don't think, like, to me, he has the highest upside of anyone below Bailey that we've looked at so far. Okay, that'll do it for this portion of the show. Not sure what else this might be running with at some point, but we'll say goodbye and talk to y'all next time. Till then.